Page 113, 5. Supports. Encouraging every step. Communication is what the listener does. Peter Drucker. We focused on the call to action, the arguments, and the environment. Now we look at our roles as supporters and catalysts. We want to communicate with people so that as many as possible start, continue, and finish the trek to Veganville. To do this, we'll need to encourage them, give directions, and tell them when and where to take a break. We can talk in a manner that makes them more likely to start or continue or discourages them. Most importantly, we also need to listen to them. In short, this chapter is about communicating with our audience, whether as an individual or as a group, whether one-to-one or as a broadcast, whether to a passerby in the street or an influential person like the CEO or a catering company. One principle will be central. When we communicate, we should put ourselves in our audience's shoes. An important part of our task is to welcome others to our group. To that end, in this chapter, I also take a pragmatic look at the concept of veganism. Most of this book has been about reduction. I've emphasized, however, that it would be complementary to a vegan message, so it's time to examine how we frame that message. When reading this chapter, keep in mind the main points from what we've learned so far. A large group of meat reducers may be a better way to change the system as they drive demand and supply. Becoming stricter gets easier as there are more options and social acceptance grows. We don't need to use moral arguments all the time. Non-moral motivations can develop into moral ones, and compassion can grow after people have taken the first steps for whatever reasons. We have to create a facilitating environment by working on institutional change. Audience-centered communication. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Harperly. A license to influence. As I have explained, it's not just a vegan movement that creates change for animals. Businesses, health and environmental organizations, and all sorts of institutions may do so more indirectly with or without vegans influencing them. Nevertheless, the vegan movement will continue to play an important role for the foreseeable future. The strength of our movement lies in the skill sets of our members or adherents. The more effectively and eloquently we communicate and advocate, the more progress we'll make. I'm talking about communication here in a particularly broad sense. It's not just how we speak or write, but everything others might see and experience relating to us. Communication is what we post on social media, our behavior in restaurants, how we cook, what we eat, how we shop. It's what we read, what we watch, what we share. It's the clothes we wear and how we look. It's our general attitude, especially in certain circumstances. Are we cheerful or miserable? It's everything. Some people are more effective advocates for animals than others. Some of us may be too loud, others too quiet. The farmer may be too assured of their beliefs and have developed a style of advocacy that can push beyond effectiveness. The latter may be too shy or believe they have no business talking to others about what they should eat. But we need to strike a balance in our outreach between these extremes. As for the quiet ones, if our desire to change things is based on both rational arguments and empathy, it's perfectly acceptable to try to influence people. Obviously, we shouldn't try to force people to adopt our vegan diet. In fact, much of this book is exactly about how not to do that. But I want to stress that we shouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed about wanting to open people's hearts and minds. There's nothing special about advocacy. Everyone making a sale, every mom and dad, every child, every husband or wife tries to change someone else's mind, often for much less noble objectives than ours. Furthermore, even if we don't want to, we can help influence people around us. It should be said that no friend of animals should believe they don't have the right to influence others, then they are not vegan or even vegetarian. Anyone can do good for animals. We shouldn't think that a non-vegan can do nothing right, whereas a vegan can do nothing wrong. We shouldn't consider non-vegan animal advocacy less valuable than the mere fact of being a vegan, even a non-active one. It should be beyond any doubt that people like Jonathan Safran Foer, with his book Eating Animals, or the philosopher Peter Singer, author of Animal Liberation, were more consequential in reducing animal consumption than almost any one of us could ever dream of, and neither of them is strictly vegan. A matter of choice. People may tell us that what they eat is a matter of choice. I respect vegans, they add. We should, of course, respect people's freedom to choose, but at the same time, we can make clear when appropriate that they are not talking about picking the color of the new wallpaper in their living room. For the animals, it's not a question of blue or green, but suffering or not suffering, a matter of life and death. Although everyone is still free to choose what to eat, we can at least say that those who choose vegetarian or vegan food have more solid arguments for their choice than omnivores have for theirs. Everyone who cares about rational conversation should take that into account. Moreover, it's not as if the general population is choosing freely what to eat. People are influenced by what supermarkets, producers, and restaurants coax them to eat. Subsidies and governmental policies skew the market to make some foods more available and cheaper than others. We are all affected by prices and promotions. It's hard to choose what's on our plates independently of what our parents, grandparents, or other people in our nation or culture eat or ate. Most of us are only under the illusion that we are free to eat what we want. We are all affected by the belief systems that Melanie Joy calls carnism 2010. Our vegan voice won't limit our omnivorous friends and any further. It might even liberate them. We should consider our influence no different from that of the media, family, or peers. We should, however, avoid being coercive or manipulative. Trying to influence another person is not a crime, but it is an art. It starts with no thinking in terms of persuading people, but rather than in helping them to open up, not behaving like a moral crusader, judge or police officer, but as a supporter. Our objective, impact. When communicating again broadly conceived, it's vital always to bear one question in mind. Am I making a real impact for the animals? You may think, of course, what else? But let's look at some of the other motivations we may consciously or unconsciously be paying too much attention to. Impact is not about speaking of truth. If we are asked at dinner why we are vegan and we launch into the gruesome suffering of animals, we may be speaking the truth and our truth, but we may be alienating some people at the table. In this case, conferring our truth is not that important and can be counterproductive. The more subjective the truth we're discussing, the more problematic it can be. Statements such as meat is murder or dairy is rape are subject to interpretation. See box on the next page. We are not betraying ourselves or the animals when we don't speak those kinds of truth. On the contrary, we are doing the animals the greatest favor when we think about what changes people. In fact, it's not about being right. Whether we're talking about our beliefs that we are objectively right, or we actually are objectively right, being correct or consistent doesn't necessarily have any genuine effect on what we want to achieve. We may by definition be accurate in arguing that eating animals is murder, but if another people doesn't agree, it's moot. We all love to be right. It's a great feeling. So we often pursue this goal over anything else. But if we are constantly seeking a self-righteous rush, we may miss learning something because we don't want our interlocutor to show us contradictory, yet perhaps equally correct and true arguments. In fact, it's not about winning an argument. Even if the other person tells us we're right, we haven't necessarily had a positive effect. A thing from sales is win an argument, lose a customer. When the other person feels they've lost, they may feel even less sympathetic toward us or our cause. Benjamin Franklin says, if you argue, rankle, and contradict, you may achieve a victory sometimes, but it will be an empty victory because you will never get your opponent's goodwill. Carnegie 122. Being right, winning an argument, and speaking our truth are distractions. Impact is about actual change, i.e., helping the other person become more open to changing his or her mind and acting in a manner that contributes to less animal suffering. If that happens, then it's not just who win, but everyone. You may know philosopher Jeremy Bentham's famous dictum, the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer. To emphasize the importance of impact, here's a homemade variation. The question is not, I am right, nor is it my truth, but does this work? Is meat murder? Meat is murder is a well-known slogan, launched by the band The Smiths 2 decades ago. It can often be found on buttons and stickers and a part of vegans' argument. But is meat really murder? Well, not how murder is presently defined. Murder at this moment is legally the taking of another human life. It also implies malicious intent, which isn't present in meat eaters or slaughterers, we assume and hope. And two, we mean that killing for meat is murder, or that meat eating itself is murder. You can see the problems in concluding that meat is murder is a true statement. Maybe it's our truth and we believe it wholeheartedly, but others don't. We may try to convert them, and some people may tell us we are correct. But what we should really care about is not whether meat is murder, but whether the slogan is effective. Will people be any closer to changing their minds and listening to our arguments, or just annoyed with us when we say it? Do they feel we are accusing them of something and making them feel guilty? Do they think that we are holier than thou, and resent us for making them uneasy and thus even less likely to change? These questions are hard to answer, and we will probably never find out what sort of influence our discussion has on the other person. Indeed, our interlocutor may not even know it in him or herself. Still, it is possible to be open to people's response to us if they are genuinely thinking about what we have said or are defensive, if they like or dislike us and are enjoying the conversation or not. Let's make this question and the dichotomy between speaking our own truth and speaking effectively more concrete. Imagine someone asks you, so do you think I am a murderer? I cannot imagine that answering is the affirmative would lead to a fruitful conversation in most cases. It's not about you, it's about them. Vegans believe, rightly, that they have an extremely important message and that people should listen. It's my observation that we'll reach them more effectively by not making ourselves on our message a center of attention, but the person we're communicating with. If we refuse and say, no, it's about the animals, not about them, then we've already fallen into the trap on only being interested in what we want, even if it is about the animals. Some people are well trained to focus on others. A therapist will concentrate on her client and vanish into the background. She listens attentively and when she talks, it will mostly be to ask questions. As activists, we often behave in the opposite manner. We believe we have a therapy ready that will solve everyone and the world's problems, and people just have to listen to us and apply it. One of the best books about talking to people, influencing others, and conducting valuable conversation is the timeless classic How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. In spite of its title, Carnegie's bestseller is not about manipulating people, but about being sincerely interested in others. Carnegie puts the need for a focus on our audience like this. Of course, you are interested in what you want, but no one else is. The rest of us are just like you. We are interested in what we want. Think about who among your friends and family you have the best discussion with. You may like them as conversation partners for different reasons. They may tell interesting stories. They may be hilarious and light up a room. But chances are that the reason you enjoy their company is because they take an active interest in you. They ask sincerely how you are doing, not as a formality, but because they want to know the answer. They want to know what's on your mind, and they inquire how they can help you. They are people who let you tell your story. We need to be that kind of person if we want others to be open to what we have to say. True, it's perfectly possible to be manipulative, but it's just as possible to be sincerely interested in other people because we care about them just as we care about animals. Yanya, you are not your audience. A facet of being audience-centered is realizing that we are not necessarily the same kind of person as those we want to reach. You are not your audience. I abbreviate it to the principle Yanya. Y-A-N-Y-A. Means that whatever applies to you doesn't necessarily apply to your target audience. As a case in point, just because you became a vegan after watching the film Earthlings doesn't mean that everyone else will or should. In psychology, the idea that everyone is and thinks like you on a certain issue is called false consensus bias. People differ from one another in numerous areas, not least in what influences thinking and behavior. We differ in age and education, which may help determine our openness to new ideas or habits. We differ in mental and emotional flexibility, speed of picking up new ideas, and capacity to learn. Some of us are better cooks than others. Some of us have allergies or a chronic condition that may make it more difficult for us to eat a particular diet. Different childhoods. Most importantly, we are interested in and passionate about different things. Some cares about the environment, others about their health, still others about their wallets. Some don't seem to care about anything at all. One way to see the difference between ourselves and the rest of the population is in terms of the famous diffusion of innovation model, see figure 13, we try to explain and predict the rate at which new ideas and technology will spread throughout a population. Rogers. Diffusion of innovation, innovators, early adopters, early maturity, late maturity, laggards. Let's take the smartphone as an example. Look at the innovation curve in figure 13 to guess where you are situating. If you live in a technologically advanced country and bought a smartphone in 2005, you were among the innovators or early adopters. If you bought your first smartphone recently, say in 2017, you are in the late maturity category. You are cautious and like to wait until you can be sure, much as we might like to imagine that all people are innovators. Vegans are innovators under this schema. This diagram illustrates that people have different motivations for and concerns about taking or on something they consider new. It would for and concerns about taking or something they considered new. It would be a mistake to try to get the late maturity on board right away with the arguments that influence the innovators or early adopters. Remember Solomon's Axe, experience about conformity from the first chapter? The lesson was that many people feel a great need to conform. In their food choices too, conformists don't want to be perceived as deviating from the norm. Some will wait until it's safe to switch to another diet or product. The famous marketer Seth Godin puts it like this: the mistake idea merchants make is that they bring their fringe ideas to people who don't like fringe ideas, instead of taking their time and working their way through the progression. 2015. Godin suggests and working their way through the progression. Godin suggests changing vocabularies depending on the audience, using words like new, breakthrough, or pioneer for the innovators and proven, established, or everyone to address the waste. 2017. What Godin and others are saying is that we should meet people where they are and appeal to the values they already cherish rather than telling them which values they should have. We are often prone to think that we'll influence people with the arguments that have meant something to us. Rebelling an argument makes so much sense that others would be crazy not to agree with it. But others might not be interested in our arguments or in rational argumentation at all, especially when it comes to food, and even more so meat. We can behave deeply irrationally. We'll go out of our way and ignore all kinds of warnings in order to keep eating the food we love and have since childhood, and that we associate with wonderful family moments. Of course, vegans advocates do have things in common with the audience that we want to reach. Most people care about some animals to some degree, but that orientation is usually not enough motivation to make people change, so that orientation shouldn't lead us too quickly to take the next step and say, you care about animals, so you shouldn't eat meat. That conclusion is often one bridge too far or a step taken too quickly. The same people who say they love animals may have other values too, as they may have other concerns, issues, and fears that it would be unwise for us to ignore. We can try to employ with and everyone to the arguments that we found convincing, and we blame them if they don't change, but often we'll only be kidding ourselves. A better decision would be for us to remember that we are not our audience and to practice what may be the most important skill any activist can develop: to walk in another's shoes. Walking in our shoes means that we try to imagine what it's like to be that other person. Who are they and what issues are they dealing with? How do they see our issue and hear our message? What do they focus on? What do they ignore? What sounds incredible, stupid, or invisible to them? And no less importantly, how do they perceive us as a messenger? How credible are we to them? How sympathetic are we, or how annoying? Gotta have my junk food. On the menu of the Heart Attack Grill in Las Vegas, you can find burgers that literally come with a healthy warning with names like the Quadruple Bypass Burger. Waitresses are dressed up as sexualized nurses. A morbidly obese man who greeted customers at the entrance died of a heart attack a few years ago. People willingly and knowingly walk into this restaurant to subject themselves to this kind of food. Another illustration of how irrational people can be around food is what occurred when Chef Jamie Oliver introduced a healthy lunch program to some British schools a few years ago. When students at one of those schools continued to eat their usual junk food at the McDonald's or Burger King around the corner, teachers decided not to let the students out during lunch break so that the healthy or at least healthier dishes would be their only option. A couple of mothers were so angry at this decision that they took orders from the students through the school fence, went to their favorite fast food restaurants, and single-handedly brought back about 70 orders for the students each day for the next couple of weeks. Wow! These examples make clear that people are irrational when it comes to what they eat. Walking in others' shoes is a learned skill. Even if we pride ourselves on our empathy, most of us find putting ourselves in someone else's position difficult. Even when we think we are doing it, we can always improve. Some factors may impede our understanding of what it's like to be someone else. We may have class, gender, racial or other prejudices and privileges. We may have lived in our vegan bubble for so long we've forgotten what it was like to be an omnivore or pescarian. We may find it difficult to understand non-vegans in online discussion because of the limits of the medium, whether those limits are 140 characters, multiple simultaneous threads, or troll-infested fields. We may get so wired up that we don't even want to understand where the other person is coming from. We may say we don't care about how others see, hear, or perceive us. That's a perfect release valve and attitude if we have nothing to sell, except, of course, we have a lot to sell. Some may think we can only approach others using certain well-defined techniques, according to a certain ideology or philosophy that outlines clearly what is or is not permissible in our outreach. Some vegans will actually consider it unethical to take into account where other people are and will only want to bring their message in its pure, undiluted form. This is more or less the opposite of walking in other people's shoes. It's a conviction that other people should walk in our shoes, whether they fit or not and whether they like them or not, because they are the only correct pair of shoes. Car salespeople attempt to get a sense of what potential customers value. They talk about the safety of the car to young parents and emphasize its coolness to single men. Pardon the cliches. The salespeople who know there's not single right argument to sell the car, and they aren't considered about following the rules and guidelines of the sales textbook they had to study in college. All they know is that they'll be most successful if they tailor their pattern to the audience. Keeping our audience in mind means there isn't one correct approach, but that we should always adapt and see which is the best fit. Some practice. Playing the devil's advocate. An exercise that can help you take another's viewpoints is to play the devil's advocate and try to make a convincing case against your own, either by yourself or in dialogue with someone else. You can argue, for example, that it's a real challenge to go vegan. Pick anything that you basically disagree with. If you do this well, you may discover more and or better arguments than you previously thought existed. Yanya exercise. Try to imagine what omnivores, and not you as a vegetarian or vegan, might feel about the following statements. Think each one through. You may ask omnivorous friends for their opinion. President Bill Clinton being touted as a vegan in the newspaper but eating fish. A vegan not wanting to eat a sandwich because it touched a meat sandwich. Non-Jewish vegans comparing what happened to the animals to the Holocaust. What people of color think when white vegans compare animal husbandry to slavery. Vegans refusing to participate in Christmas time or Thanksgiving dinners because dead animals are being served. The art of listening. What we say may be less important than how we say it and the dynamic that emerges between ourselves and the other person. As author Maya Angelou said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. In the end, the people we're talking to will live with a certain feeling about the whole interaction. Whether that feeling is positive or not doesn't depend on the arguments we present, but on our whole attitude. Process, in other words, may be more important than content. How friendly were we? Did we let our interlocutors finish? Did we make them feel we understood their arguments, or did we talk the whole time ourselves? Maybe the most important question here is, how well did we listen? Listening skills are profoundly important for advocacy and for being a pleasant human being in general. Think of those you know who are really bad listeners. They talk all the time, and when you say something, it's not clear if they heard you or not. They give no sign that they did. They start on about their own issues immediately. They hardly ever ask questions, and if they do, they don't listen to your answer. Most of us find such people tiring and annoying. As passionate advocates for animal cause, we might be even worse at listening than the general population. We have crucial, life-changing information to offer, and other people need to shut up and listen to us. We want the world to know all the facts we have at our disposal. We want our audience to understand our arguments and follow and copy our train of thoughts as well as our behavior, preferably without question. Moreover, we believe that whatever our audience will say or object to, we've heard it all before, and there's precious little need to listen to them. Consequently, it's all too simple for us to be self-content and self-focused, and to lose touch with our audience. By contrast, people who are good listeners make us feel heard. They recognize us. We feel valued by their attention and their presence. Sometimes, however, when people talk to us about an issue, they may have problems with their significant other or had a fight with their mom or so on. We are thinking about what to say if we are not distracted by other thoughts. But saying something is not always necessary. Our suggestions for solutions may be welcome, but often all that people need is someone who really hears them. In his book Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life, Marshall Rosenberg puts it like this: don't just do something, stand there. Rosenberg says that believing we have to fix situations and make others feel better prevents us from being present. Page 93. He quotes the psychologist Carl Rogers. When someone really hears you without passing judgment on you, without trying to take responsibility for you, without trying to mold you, it feels damn good. When I have been listened to and when I have been heard, I am able to perceive my words in a new way and to go on. It is astonishing how elements that seem insoluble become soluble when someone listens, how confusions that seem irremediable turn into relatively clear flowing streams when one is heard. Page 113. Stephen Covey, author of the bestseller The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says, most people do not listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have a ready answer when it's our turn to speak, especially when we are a public debate, for example. But formulating a response in our head will obviously affect the quality of our listening and thus jeopardize our understanding of the other person. Listening wouldn't be half as useful if the other person didn't realize you were listening. Try this experiment. Tell a conversation partner not to provide you with any verbal or non-verbal cues, just such as nodding or saying or okay. It's weird and annoying, isn't it? These cited feedback expressions are crucial for a conversation. It's also useful now and then to paraphrase what the other person says, so you are saying that. Since that response helps you listen more attentively and makes the other person feel heard. The same goes for asking questions. Of course, none of this should be a mechanical process in which we use paraphrasing and questions to pretend we are listening or empathizing. We have to be genuinely interested in the answers they give. In the Animal Activist Handbook, Matt Ball and Bruce Friedrich go further and suggest that when people have questions or objections, we consider answering these with a question. They may be effective for 3 reasons. 1, we can make people think. 2, we make them feel heard, and they may return the favor by listening in return. And 3, from their answers, we may learn more information about them. Page 49. The most obvious example of this technique is to answer the question, why are you vegan, with why do you eat meat? Of course, when we are communicating, we would like others to take note. Sharing our opinions, values, and facts with people is far from the waste of time, especially if they're asked to hear them. Just remember to pay attention to the process and to listen, and don't overdo it. Consider the quantity of information you provide others with. We often think that the more information we give, the better. But it's easy for us to be overwhelming. Besides, people also have a limited ability to listen. They will get bored or distracted after a while. How well we listen may involve several factors outside our control. Namely, some of us may have remarkably short attention spans. What we should avoid is giving people reasons not to listen to us. One technique is not to appear too different from our audience. Meeting people where they are means we have an idea of their desires and objectives and what interests them. It means speaking their language and jargon. It may even mean looking like them. We know from research that how we look influences how credible we are and how people relate to us. This is one further element in which we can be adaptive. If we give a presentation inside a large company, we might choose to dress differently from when we are addressing a crowd and at an eco-fest. In Rules for Radicals, Saul Alinsky gives more drastic advice. If the real radical finds that having long hair sets up psychological barriers to communication and organization, he cuts his hair. My thing, Alinsky adds, is solid communication with people in the community, page 19. The remainder of this chapter consists of more do's to practice and don'ts to avoid in achieving this solid communication. Treading softly. Understanding others a prerequisite to enabling them to open their hearts and minds, and thus to helping animals, means comprehending what I call the big vegan handicap. The term, which I borrow from golf to indicate an initial disadvantage, describes how advocates have to deal with a degree of defensiveness when they talk to people about not eating animals. Activists can attribute the defensiveness to the non-vegans' laziness and indifference. However, I believe it's more productive to examine two other emotions, guilt and fear. Most vegans have experienced it often more than once. You are sitting around the dinner table with other people. Then or at some point found out that you are vegetarian or vegan, and the conversation turns to not eating meat. Omnivores in this situation often become defensive or angry, even where you are accommodating and open. Vegans need to understand that our mere presence can be enough to make non-vegans uncomfortable. As I've stated before, I believe that most people are aware that how animals are raised today doesn't accord with the values they consider appropriate for our treatment of them. Kindness, not cruelty, care, and not exploitation. The general public is more or less conscious that pigs, chickens, and cows undergo suffering that would not wish on their own dog and cat. They may think it would be better to buy human meat, believing that it's such a thing. Or even that killing animals for food is wrong. Faced with the discrepancy between our beliefs and our action, many of us feel guilty. Anthropologists have found many examples of pre-modern civilizations that coped with their guilt for killing animals with specific atonement ceremonies, circles. Talking to a hunter. A great example of audience-centered communication is often by Matt and Phil Layton, the duo known as Vegan Bros. When an individual tells an animal advocate that he or she likes to hunt and asks what they think about it, the Vegan Bros suggest we answer so that the hunter isn't placed on the defensive or assumes we hate her or him. Their suggestion is to say this: I'm not going to say hunting is good, but it is nowhere near as bad as factory farming. Many animal advocates would consider this This is a mistake because it appears to condone hunting. Nonetheless, we would be telling the truth. Hunting is less bad than factory farming. Framing the conversation in this manner means you shift the conversation to factory farming. When both parties can agree on a topic, you found a starting point for discussion. Furthermore, the hunter may see us as someone open for discussion and whom they can on this relate on. Although, unlike these communities, most of us no longer live amongst the animals we eat. Many of us may feel even more culpable than we might have done in the past at our thoughtless exploitation. We vegetarians and vegans are living, breathing reminders of the discrepancy and guilt. We bring up the cognitive dissonance that non-vegans may be trying to crush. The mere presence of vegetarians will increase dissonance experienced from consuming animal flesh. Writes one researcher based on a study, Geber 37, that nagging interior voice that non-vegans don't want to hear is telling them that they have been behaving unethically and doing so all their lives. Realizations such as these are not fun. As Melanie Joy writes, nobody wants to identify with the bad guy, and people will go to great lengths to avoid seeing themselves in a negative light, including refusing to support a cause they might otherwise believe in. 2008, page 19. In chapter 3, we talked about how people reduce internal conflict dissonance reducing strategies by, in this case, rationalizing meat eating with a variety of arguments from terrible to weak. When people see others make more ethical choices, they may become resentful and denigrate them. A phenomenon called do-gooder derogation, Minson and Moning. In one study, those who shopped for clothes using ethical barometers, such as whether the clothes were made in sweatshops, were judged by the willfully ignorant as odd, less sexy, and unattractive. The funniest problem here isn't the derogation itself, but that the act of denigrating undermines the denigrator's own commitment to ethical values in the future. The others claim that derogation is partially driven by the self-threat that consumers feel when they make a negative social comparison with others like vegans. Vegans should therefore try to reduce the negative contrast, which do not stimulate people to better consumption behavior. Instead, the study's authors suggest they should promote a scenario in which consumers are likely to demonstrate moral elevation as opposed to self-protective negative judgment of others. Zane et al. Non-vegans often complain that vegetarians and vegans are preachy and moralizing. Many times that's true, partly perhaps because of the strongly ethical bias within veganism and the philosophical basis of animal advocacy since the mid-70s. It's also true that vegans, myself included, may talk about ethical veganism and refer to educating others, in a fashion that gives an impression of moral superiority and assumption that those who don't share our views are unschooled. However, the above study makes clear that non-vegans' complaints about vegan moralizing are driven partly by the non-vegans' defensiveness. To stop non-vegans thinking like this, one thing we vegans can do is to talk about our own imperfections, of the actions of we took that we know we shouldn't, or how we didn't become vegan overnight and needed some persuading ourselves. It's vital for vegans to show non-vegans that we are not some kind of alien species with an unattainable level of morality or discipline. How to be a non-judgmental vegan? Many of us vegans find it difficult not to blame meat eaters or not to be judgmental, and even harder not to come across as judgmental. Still, we have to try never to be nor or appear so, as most people who feel judged will be less likely to listen and change. In my experience, no one likes a judger. Here are some tips on avoiding being or seeming judgmental. Grow your self-awareness. Try to catch yourself when you are being judgmental. Being aware of it is a first step to changing it. Realize that you don't know people on their situation. Think of something those you're judging might be experiencing. Realizing they may have a good reason for their behavior can calm you in an instant. You may cross a reckless driver in traffic, but what if he's en route to the hospital to visit his dying mother? Remember that everyone is different. We were wired differently, have a different genetic makeup, lead different lives. Because of these reasons, we do things differently and may need more time to change. Admit that you are not perfect. Being a vegan doesn't make you awesome in all aspects of your life. Be wary of throwing stones while living in a glass house. Recall that you probably were a meat eater once or pescatarian. Unless you've been vegan from birth, you may have eaten the same idea and use the same arguments as non-vegans. And if you were reared as a vegan, it was not your conscious decision. Did you go vegan the moment someone told you it was wrong to eat animals? Or were you primed already by your environment? Comprehend that people may be doing great deeds which you aren't. They may be helping in a homeless shelter, volunteering for a human relief organization, or donating money to good causes. You don't have a lock on virtue or compassion. You don't have a lock on virtue and compassion. Turn it around. Think of a situation in which someone judges you for stuff you are doing wrong. How would you react if you met someone who's more vegan than you, or is a vegan and pro bono human rights lawyer? Try to be honest. You may think you are Mrs. or Mr. Rational. You will admit to being wrong and changing your behavior on a dime. But it's more likely that you will start to conjure reasons to protect your sense of self-worth. Realize that trying to be non-judgmental is a matter of effectiveness. You can suspend judgment. Your activism will be better for the animals, for the person you are judging, and even for you. The research on what role guilt plays as a driver for behavioral change is complex. Guilt can definitely lead to change in some circumstances, but we need to be circumspect about mixing it into our vegan messaging. Guilt-based messages can make someone even less likely to do what you want him or her to do, as they are likely to evoke self-protection rather than encourage action. Brennan and Binnie. When I interact with non-vegans, my working assumption is that they already possess a certain useful sense of guilt, and that it's not beneficial to strengthen that guilt by talking or writing in an accusatory tone, or suggesting their complicity in horrendous cruelty. I found it more helpful to provide non-vegans with ideas on how to cope with guilt, which in practice boils down to helping them to avoid eating animals. If you want to blame someone, it's better to target the meat industry without giving the impression that we consumers don't bear any personal responsibility. Melanie Joy talks about walking the fine line between challenging and supporting the listener's paradigm. 2008, page 119. Next to guilt is fear. Some vegans might find the fears that people express over going vegan ridiculous and trivial compared to animal suffering. I sympathize with that idea, but it's not particularly effective to treat such concern as simply winning. Put yourself in the other person's shoes and consider what kind of fears they may have. Fears you may have long forgotten. There's the fear they will never enjoy food as much as they do today, or of being unhealthy, of not longer being welcome at dinner parties or family celebrations, or mockery and even ostracism from loved ones or humiliations by vegans for being inconsistent when they can wholly adopt the diet of losing part of their identity and becoming a different person, amongst other anxieties. None of these fears is life-threatening, but none is conducive to change either. We should try to avoid increasing non-vegans' fear or concerns. It's not constructive, for example, to name every item non-vegans won't be allowed to eat or buy as vegans. One terrific means of dealing with non-vegans' concern is the so-called feel-felt-found approach derived from sales. It consists of 3 steps. 1. Empathize with your listeners. Validate how they feel and really hear their concern. 2. Reassure your interlocutors by saying they are not the only one to have felt like this. Here it is, of course, important to be in touch with what you felt before you went vegan, or maybe still feel. Rather than pretending you never had this feeling, you can also refer to what other people have felt. 3. Let them know what you and others have found that is comforting. Let's say a non-vegan host tells you she loves throwing dinner parties and she's afraid of limiting her cooking by reducing her choice of ingredients. Again, this may sound inconsequential to vegans, but as this is a concern to her, you should take it seriously. You could say, right, so you feel that going vegan might limit your creativity in the kitchen. I understand that. I feel the same. It's like, what's left, right? And in theory, you are certainly right. In practice, most vegans seem to find that once they ditch meat and dairy, they actually increase that variation in their ingredients and cooking. That's because being vegan leads you to discover all kinds of products and ingredients you never knew existed, let alone tasted. Can a super low-carb vegan make you feel guilty? It's not easy to walk in other people's shoes and imagine the feelings we may engender in others with our communication. If we don't think guilt is counterproductive, if we don't experience or have forgotten about precision resistance, if we can imagine being irritated with do-gooders, then it's hard to take those feelings into account. Here's an exercise that can help us be more empathetic regarding those feelings. The point is to imagine someone whose behavior seems even more consistently virtuous than yours. Someone who goes beyond veganism. Let me present to you Belle, the super locavore SV vegan. From locavore eating locally. Belle takes into account the fact that in the mechanized harvesting of plants, many small rodents and birds, not to mention insects, are killed. So Belle only eats what she harvests by hand. From her own organic garden and those of her fellow thieves. She doesn't purchase anything from stores. Belle believes her diet is possible for everyone since those without a garden can find another SV with one and live off that land. She considers her lifestyle the moral baseline and that it's an ethical duty to eat as she eats. People who are merely vegan and hence consume plant products that entail the avoidable suffering of small rodents and birds are in Belle's eyes and those of her friends hypocrites. How would you feel if you met Belle and she called you a hypocrite? I'm sure many a vegan would rush to point out to Belle the differences between a vegan and a SV, between cows and those rodents, between intentionally eating animals and eating plants, the harvest of which unintentionally killed animals, but I'm not sure there truly is a difference. If there is, it's more enough for us to suspend our disbelief and go along for a moment with this exercise. The point is to imagine someone like Belle who can engender a sense of inferiority or guilt within us. Another example of others being considerably more virtuous are those who donate a percentage of their income to good causes, as the effective altruism (EA) movement suggests. William McAskill, one of the founders of EA, has pledged to give away every penny he earns over $28,000. Think about how much money you earn. Can you see other people could argue that you need to give some of that away? What if they said it was immoral not to, and that you will be responsible for the death of several people if you spend your money on a new cell phone or clothes you don't need rather than those dying of disease, homelessness, or hunger? Je finis le reste plus tard, il y a trop de bruit. Je m'arrête là pour l'instant.